The click of the courthouse door latch still echoes in my head. Sharp, metallic, final. It was the sound that ended his smirk and started everything that followed. I remember how my palms stuck to the cold aluminum handrail that afternoon, the same way truth sometimes clings when you're too afraid to hold it. His name was Ethan Rourke. Mine's Daniel Carr. We'd once shared everything: lectures, coffee breaks, and late-night study sessions in that damp basement library where law students learned to bluff before they learned to argue. Ethan used to joke that truth was just well-performed fiction. Back then, I thought it was arrogance. Later, I realized it was prophecy. The last time I saw him before it all fell apart was the day he bragged. Not about winning a case, not about some brilliant motion or argument, but about lying. About doing it in front of a judge. He said it like someone describing a prank. His words sat between us like cigarette smoke, curling up in lazy defiance of the ceiling fan. "It's not lying," he said, grinning. "It's strategy. You just have to keep your story cleaner than the truth." I didn't laugh. I remember tracing the condensation ring under my coffee cup and wondering how people like him make it past the bar exam. He noticed the silence, and his grin only widened. "Come on, Dan. You think justice is pure? Grow up." That was 6 months before the hearing. 6 months before I learned what it means to let someone hang on their own words. Back then, I was working for a mid-size firm in St. Louis, Lander and Price, the kind that takes on insurance cases, city contracts, and whatever civil disputes keep the lights on. I wasn't a courtroom regular. Mostly I drafted documents, took depositions, and did the invisible work that keeps lawyers from drowning in paper. Ethan had joined a criminal defense outfit across town. Flashier, faster, louder. He thrived there. The kind of place that rewarded charm over ethics, and he had plenty of both. We'd drifted since law school, but when you're in the same bar association, you run into ghosts more often than you'd like. The first time I saw his name again was on a filing. Rourke v. Jessup, a personal injury case that crossed my desk by accident. Our firm was reviewing background on a contractor for a separate client. His name was buried in the footnotes of a deposition. I remember pausing on it. Something in the transcript felt off. Too neat. Too rehearsed. Then came the rumor. Someone at the courthouse cafeteria mentioned that Rourke had pulled off a miracle cross-exam. Their tone carried that mix of admiration and disgust only lawyers can manage. Apparently, he discredited a key witness by catching her in a contradiction that didn't exist. She hadn't lied. He just made it look like she had. That's when I started paying attention. You don't need to be a prosecutor to know when someone's bending procedure. It shows up in the details. The misplaced signature, the timeline that suddenly syncs too perfectly, the expert whose testimony sounds memorized. I started looking closer. At first, it was curiosity. Then, it was disbelief. By the time I found the first discrepancy, I wasn't surprised. It was a discovery packet, an emailed copy of surveillance footage Ethan had claimed to introduce late. He'd time-stamped it as received 2 days before the deadline. But the email header told a different story. It was sent 1 day after. Minor, maybe, but in litigation, that's enough to shift the burden. It wasn't enough to report, not yet. But it was enough to keep a folder. I called it Rourke Trace, a harmless name for something that would eventually burn a career. My girlfriend back then, Laura, noticed the shift before I did. "You've been pacing again," she said one night, leaning against the kitchen counter. The fridge hummed behind her. The smell of burnt pasta sauce hung in the air because I'd forgotten to stir. "It's the guy from law school, right?" "Yeah," I said. He's doing something I can't prove." She raised an eyebrow. "So you're trying to prove it?" I nodded, though what I really meant was I need to understand why I can't let it go. Laura was an ER nurse. She lived in a world where truth mattered every second. When she told a doctor a patient's blood pressure dropped, there was no strategy. Maybe that's why I admired her so much. She believed in facts, and somewhere along the way, I'd started to doubt mine. Weeks passed. Work piled up. I told myself I was done thinking about Ethan, but I wasn't. The more I ignored it, the more his laugh echoed in my head, the one from that cafe when he'd called lying an art. Then came a client call that changed everything. A man named Peter Holt was suing his former contractor for negligence in a building collapse. I was assigned to the discovery team. Simple enough, until I read the opposing counsel's name, E. Rourke. My stomach dropped. Different case, different facts, same pattern. I read the affidavits twice. The timeline didn't fit. Ethan's client claimed an inspection took place before the permit was issued. Impossible. Yet the document trail made it look legitimate. I compared signatures. They were identical across multiple dates. Two identical. Same pressure, same tilt, same minor ink blot by the T, forged. It hit me like a pulse of heat. I leaned back in my chair, fluorescent light buzzing above, and felt that mix of adrenaline and nausea lawyers get when they realize truth isn't a straight line. It's a maze, and someone else just redrew the walls. I didn't report him right away. That's the part that still eats at me. I wanted to be sure, because in our world, accusing another attorney of misconduct is like lighting a match in a courtroom. It might illuminate the truth, or it might burn everything down. So I waited. I watched. I started keeping records, dates, filings, copies of motions, even small talk overheard in courthouse corridors. One afternoon, I caught him outside Judge Markham's courtroom. He was leaning against the railing, chatting with a reporter. "You'd be amazed what juries believe if you sound confident enough," he said. The reporter laughed. Ethan winked. And that's when I knew. It wasn't a slip. It was his method. I saw him again a week later at a continuing education seminar on ethics. The irony was enough to make me choke on my coffee. He spotted me from across the lobby. "Dan Carr, he called, loud enough for heads to turn. "Still hiding behind contracts and fine print?" I smiled. "Still allergic to truth?" He laughed like I'd told a joke, slapped my shoulder, and handed me his card. "Call me if you ever want to do real law." That card is still in my desk drawer, because one day it became Exhibit A. The collapse came 6 months later, almost to the day. I got a call from Assistant DA Myers. She sounded tired, the way prosecutors do after too many nights chasing signatures and deadlines. "Mr. Carr, you worked with Rourke before, right?" "Law school, yeah. Why?" "We've got a problem. His client's testimony in Holt v. State Licensing Board conflicts with sworn statements from another case. We're trying to confirm if it's intentional." I hesitated, then said the words that shifted everything. "I can help." The next few weeks blurred into late nights and coffee rings. I reviewed every transcript I had, every document, cross-referencing his witnesses. And then, buried in the hearing transcript, I found it. A line so arrogant it was practically signed in neon. My client's inspection records speak for themselves. We've always prioritized safety above shortcuts. But 2 months earlier, in another deposition under oath, Ethan had said the opposite. The inspection schedule was flexible. We adjusted to meet client demands. That was it. A direct contradiction. Same witness, same attorney, same topic, opposite claims. And he'd bragged about it, publicly. When I sent the excerpts to Myers, she didn't respond for an hour. Then, "This is gold, but we'll need your testimony to authenticate your records." Testimony. I stared at that word like it was a mirror. For months, I'd chased truth in secret. Now it wanted my name attached. Laura wasn't thrilled. "You're going to testify against him?" she asked. "I'm not against him," I said quietly. "I'm just telling the truth." She set her mug down. "Daniel, that is against him." She wasn't wrong. The night before the hearing, I couldn't sleep. I sat on the couch, legal pad on my lap, reading my statement over and over. The apartment was silent, except for the ticking of the cheap wall clock Laura had bought at a thrift store. Each tick felt like another second of cowardice if I backed out. At dawn, I finally said out loud, "I'm not doing this for revenge." But some part of me knew that wasn't the full truth. The courtroom was half empty that morning. Just a few lawyers, a clerk, and the DA's assistant flipping through her notes. Ethan walked in late, tie loosened, grin already polished. When he saw me on the witness list, the grin faltered for a second. Just one. But I caught it. He tried to recover. "Carr, you're with the DA now?" "Temporary consultant," I said. "Just here to clarify a few inconsistencies." He smirked. "Clarify or crucify?" I didn't answer. The bailiff called order, and the judge entered. For the next hour, I watched Ethan do what he did best. Talk. His voice carried confidence like a weapon. He spun timelines, quoted precedent, even joked with the clerk. The jury leaned in, but then came cross-examination. Myers stood, calm as still water. "Mr. Rourke, you testified in case number 47-182 that your client's inspection schedule was, quote, flexible. Is that correct?" He nodded. "That's right." She clicked her pen. "And in this case, you testified the schedule was fixed, mandatory, and adhered to." "Yes." "So which is it?" Ethan hesitated, and for the first time since law school, I saw him blink. Not the confident blink of someone in control, but the reflex of someone calculating the exit. He tried to spin it. Context counselor, 2 different projects. Myers smiled. "Both under the same licensing agreement. Same inspection officer, same week." Silence. The judge leaned forward. "Mr. Rourke, are you aware that conflicting sworn statements can constitute perjury?" The smirk finally cracked, and in that small, breaking sound of his throat tightening, I heard something that wasn't just guilt. It was the echo of that brag in the cafe, twisting into a noose. Afterward, I sat on the courthouse steps, tie undone, watching traffic blur by. The air smelled like asphalt and rain. Laura texted, "Did it end the way you thought?" I stared at the message, thumb hovering. Then I typed, "Not yet," because it hadn't. The hearing was only the start. The suspension, the review, the fallout, it all came later. But for the first time, I felt something close to peace. Not triumph, just quiet. The kind that comes after someone's own words finally catch up with them. The courthouse parking lot emptied slowly that night, but I stayed. Engines faded one by one until only the streetlights hummed and a single leaf scraped across the asphalt like a restless thought. My name had been added to the transcript now. Carr, Daniel E. And that meant there was no turning back. 6 months earlier, I'd thought of myself as careful, invisible, the kind of lawyer who clocked out quietly and never made enemies. Now I'd become the witness whose testimony could end a career. The morning after the hearing, I expected silence. Instead, I woke to an inbox full of noise. Half the messages were from colleagues. "Crazy day yesterday." The other half were from reporters who'd somehow gotten my email. "Can you confirm the statement linking Rourke's filings?" I didn't answer any of them, but the one message I couldn't ignore came from Ethan himself. Subject: "You made your point." Body: "Hope it was worth it." E: "No greeting, no sign-off. Just those 5 words that landed like gravel in my chest." At work, things got tense fast. Lander and Price didn't like employees tangled in public cases. My supervisor, David Lander, called me into his office that afternoon. He shut the door softly, like a man about to deliver a warning instead of advice. "Dan, I know you're trying to do the right thing," he said, "but this firm can't afford drama. We've got clients on both sides of the aisle." I didn't create drama, I said. I just told the truth. He sighed. In this business, truth is a matter of timing. Maybe next time, let someone else be the whistle. I left his office with my stomach tight and my phone buzzing again. Another email, anonymous this time. You think you're clean? Ask Myers where she got those transcripts. The message came from a throwaway address. No signature, no trail, just enough poison to make me hesitate. That night, I sat on the couch while Laura folded hospital scrubs on the coffee table. She didn't look up when she said, "You've been staring at that screen for an hour." "It's nothing," I lied. She gave a small, tired laugh. "You're terrible at that. What did he say?" "Just nothing direct, but someone's trying to make it look dirty." She folded another shirt. "Then keep everything clean. Don't let him bait you." I nodded, but I didn't feel calm. My name was in the papers now. Not front page, but close enough. Attorney's testimony sparks ethics review. Every headline carried that same photo of Ethan leaving the courthouse, chin high, sunglasses on, the picture of control. He looked untouchable, and somehow I felt exposed. A week later, Myers called. "Carr, we need you back in. The board's opening an inquiry into Rourke's prior cases." "More testimony?" I asked. "Documentation, mostly. He's contesting the perjury claim. Says the contradictions were clerical errors." I almost laughed. "So the documents forged themselves?" "His words, not mine," she said. "Can you verify the originals?" I could. I had everything archived. But part of me hesitated, because those originals were stored on my personal drive, not the firm's. If I turned them over, Lander would know I'd been investigating off record for months. That was when I realized truth doesn't just cost the liar. It costs the witness, too. "Still," I said, "I'll bring them in." When I got home, Laura was asleep. I booted up my old laptop and opened the folder labeled Rourke Trace. Every file, every email, every timestamp was there, like breadcrumbs leading back to arrogance. But when I tried to open one of the key PDFs, the inspection permit, it wouldn't load. Corrupted. I checked another. Same issue. Then another. Almost every critical document was damaged. My hands started to shake, not from fear, but recognition. Ethan had access once, months ago, when I'd sent him a harmless draft by accident. He'd replied with a joke. "Careful where you store your secrets." Now it didn't feel like a joke. The next morning, I took the laptop to an IT contact, Miles, a friend from college who worked in digital forensics. He looked over the drive for an hour while I sat in the break room of his tiny office, listening to the hum of old computers and the squeak of his chair. When he came out, his face said everything. Someone scrubbed the metadata, not just deleted files, restructured headers, rewrote creation dates. This wasn't casual. "Can you recover it?" "Some of it. But whoever did this knew what they were doing." I didn't need to ask who. Miles handed me a flash drive. "What's on here survived. Next time, don't keep evidence on Wi-Fi." That flash drive would end up being my lifeline. By the time the ethics board hearing arrived, the story had grown teeth. Local news stations mentioned a potential pattern of misconduct. Anonymous sources whispered about fabricated inspection reports. Ethan showed up looking immaculate. Navy suit, white pocket square, hair slicked like a courtroom anchor. He smiled at every reporter, even the ones throwing daggers with their questions. When he saw me across the hallway, his expression barely flickered. Just a small, almost imperceptible nod. Acknowledgement, challenge, threat. All in one. Inside the boardroom, fluorescent lights buzzed above a long mahogany table. I sat at one end beside Myers, Ethan at the other with his counsel. The chairwoman began, voice neutral but sharp. "We're reviewing discrepancies in sworn testimony and documentation. Mr. Carr, you've submitted supporting materials?" Yes, ma'am. I slid the flash drive across. Ethan's lawyer intercepted it. We'll object to the chain of custody. These files come from a personal device, not an official repository. Myers leaned forward. They were authenticated by an independent forensic specialist. The metadata matches court timestamps. Ethan chuckled softly, almost pitying. You people see ghosts in data. What you call proof is just your own projection. The chairwoman didn't look amused. We'll see whose projection holds. For 2 hours, we dissected every line of his cases, every contradiction, every altered record. Myers walked the board through my recovered files. Side-by-side comparisons showing mismatched dates, cut-and-paste signatures, even a file name left carelessly tagged finalfake.docx. Ethan tried to spin it as clerical confusion, but the board wasn't buying it. Still, he was slippery. Each answer came wrapped in charm. Until one of the board members, a retired judge, asked, Mr. Rourke, did you or did you not submit these exhibits under penalty of perjury? Ethan hesitated just half a breath too long. Then, I did. And do you stand by their authenticity? He smiled faintly. Of course. That was his mistake, because Myers had saved her final card for that exact line. She opened a new document, a scan of an internal email Ethan had sent to his paralegal. Adjust the inspection date to match the permit issue. Doesn't have to be real, just consistent. The room went still. Ethan's face drained color, then flooded red. That's taken out of context. But the board wasn't listening anymore. When the session adjourned, I stepped outside into a hallway heavy with whispers. Myers brushed past me, whispering, He's done. But I didn't feel victory, just relief tangled with something darker. Because even as they suspended his license pending review, I knew the damage wouldn't stop with him. The legal community in St. Louis was small. Word spread fast. Within days, my phone stopped ringing. Colleagues canceled lunches. A client requested to reassign counsel. By the end of the month, I was effectively iced out. It turns out, when you expose a liar, everyone else starts wondering who's next. Laura tried to keep me steady. She made dinners I barely tasted, dragged me out for walks when I wanted to disappear. One night she said, You did the right thing. Why does it feel like punishment? I stared at the dark river beyond the bridge we were standing on, because right doesn't pay rent. She slipped her hand into mine. Then let's survive until it does. I nodded, but inside, I was unraveling. A few weeks later, an envelope showed up under my door. No return address. Inside was a single printed screenshot, an old text thread between Ethan and me from law school days, laughing about bending facts in mock trials. A note scrawled across the top read, Wonder what the board would think of your humor, hero. I sat there on the floor, paper trembling in my hands. It wasn't enough to smear me, but it was enough to remind me he was still out there, still pulling strings. That night, I opened a new folder on my computer and named it Counterfile. Not for revenge, at least that's what I told myself, but for protection. I backed up every record, every trace of correspondence, every threat. Because if he tried to drag me down, I wanted the rope to tighten both ways. Then, 6 months after the first hearing, I got a call from Miles again. Dan, he said, you need to see this. He'd been reviewing some recovered logs from my old laptop. Hidden deep in the metadata was something new, an outgoing connection from Ethan's office IP to my email server, timestamped the week before my files got corrupted. Proof. He hadn't just tampered with evidence. He'd hacked me. For the first time since this started, the scales tipped back in my favor, and I realized the story wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The proof sat on my screen like a lit fuse. Miles's voice came through the speaker, low and certain. That connection log is from his firm's server. It's clean, no spoofing, no bounce routes. He accessed your files directly. I stared at the timestamp. It was exactly 3 days before my documents had been corrupted. The same night I'd received his one-line email. Hope it was worth it. Every muscle in my neck tightened. You're sure? Miles exhaled. Positive. I can package a report if you need it for the ethics board. Or the police. The word police hung in the air, heavy and unspoken. I closed my laptop. Not yet. Laura found me an hour later, sitting in the dark living room with the laptop shut and a cold cup of coffee beside it. She flipped the light on, squinting at me. Another long night? He hacked my drive, I said quietly. It's confirmed. She froze, then leaned against the doorway. Ethan? I nodded. Her jaw tightened. Then go to the authorities. What are you waiting for? I want to make sure it sticks. She frowned. You mean you want to make sure it hurts? That stopped me. She was right, and she wasn't. Part of me wanted the clean version, the justice on paper kind. But there was another part, the one that still remembered his smirk, that wanted something slower, sharper, permanent. Give me time, I said. Laura shook her head. You're not building a case anymore, Daniel. You're building a vendetta. Maybe she was right, but I couldn't stop. For the next few weeks, I worked quietly. Every night after Laura went to bed, I combed through digital forensics forums, case law, bar ethics rulings, anything that could connect unauthorized data access to legal misconduct. Miles helped where he could. He'd built a detailed report linking Ethan's firm IP address to the tampering. The tricky part was making it admissible. If I went to the authorities too soon, Ethan could spin it as a technical mix-up, claim someone else used his credentials, and muddy the water again. No, I needed him to confirm it himself. So I set a trap. It started with an innocuous email, a message to Ethan from a new account I'd created under a fake name, Client Services Inquiry at ProConsults.com. The message read, Mr. Rourke, we're conducting a background check for a prospective client referral. Could you confirm whether your firm handled the Holt licensing dispute? I hit send, then waited. Within an hour, the message pinged as read. 10 minutes later, a reply came. Yes, that was one of ours. Can I ask, who's asking? I didn't answer. Instead, I checked the server logs through Miles's tracker. Ethan had clicked the embedded verification link I had hidden inside the email signature. A simple tracer that logged IP access. There it was again. Same office IP, same user. I had him. He'd authenticated his own digital fingerprint. The next day, I forwarded the complete packet, Miles's forensic report, the email headers, the IP logs, to the State Bar's disciplinary committee under confidential seal. Then I waited. 3 days passed before I got a response. From State Bar Disciplinary Council. Subject, follow-up required. Case review. Pending. Mr. Carr, we've received your submission and will require your sworn affidavit to proceed. Please be advised that retaliation or interference by involved parties will be treated as additional misconduct. Retaliation. That word lingered, because I knew Ethan wouldn't sit quietly. I didn't have to wait long. The call came from a number I didn't recognize. When I picked up, silence filled the line, followed by a low laugh. You always were meticulous, Danny, he said, but you never learned the difference between winning and surviving. Is this how you survive now? Breaking into people's files? He chuckled. You can't prove that. I already did. There was a pause, then his tone shifted, colder, quieter. You think the bar will protect you? They eat their own. Once they're done with me, they'll come for you, for mishandling evidence, for bias, for breaching confidentiality. You'll be radioactive before this is over. He hung up before I could reply. I stared at the silent phone and felt the old law school dynamic replay in my head. Ethan charming, manipulative, always a step ahead. But this time, I had something he didn't: patience. The bar hearing was scheduled for late March. A week before it, I was walking back from the courthouse when I saw him again. He was leaning against the railing outside the coffee shop we used to haunt in college, sipping espresso like nothing had changed. When he noticed me, he smiled. "Still chasing ghosts?" I stopped a few feet away. "You should save that smile for the board." He smirked. "They'll believe me before they believe you. I know how to perform, remember?" He stepped closer. "You ever wonder why I told you I lied, why I bragged? Maybe I wanted to see if you'd do something about it." "Why?" I asked. He grinned. "Because I don't believe in guilt, Daniel. Only outcomes." For a moment, I almost pitied him. Then I realized he wasn't confessing. He was baiting me, trying to provoke emotion he could later twist into bias or harassment. I didn't take the bait. I just said, "Outcomes, huh? Then I'll see you at yours." And I walked away. The hearing day arrived cold and gray, the kind of Missouri spring morning that can't decide between frost and rain. The boardroom was crowded this time. More observers, more reporters, more quiet tension. Ethan sat at the table in another immaculate suit, eyes cool, posture perfect. If you didn't know better, you'd think he was the one running the proceeding. Myers was there again, representing the bar's interest. She nodded at me as I took my seat. The chairperson opened the floor. "Mr. Carr, please summarize your latest findings." I described the digital trail, the unauthorized access, the recovered logs. I presented Miles's report and the verification email with Ethan's IP trace. Ethan's lawyer objected, of course, calling it entrapment, but the board overruled. Then Myers brought out the final piece: an affidavit from the IT department of his firm, confirming that his credentials were used to access external files, mine, on the exact dates in question. The air seemed to drain out of the room. Ethan's confidence cracked for the first time. "This is a setup," he said, voice rising. "He's been after me since law school. He's obsessed. Ask anyone." The chairwoman didn't flinch. "Mr. Rourke, please remain seated. He's fabricating. He's manipulating data to—" "Enough," the chairwoman cut in sharply. "The evidence stands. You accessed a private server belonging to another attorney during an active ethics investigation. That is a direct violation of Conduct Code 263. Ethan's face went pale. And in that moment, I realized this wasn't the same man who'd bragged about lying in court. This was a man finally facing the mirror. After the session adjourned, I stepped outside. The rain had started, a light drizzle that blurred the courthouse lights into halos. Myers joined me under the awning. "He's done," she said softly. "Permanent disbarment likely." I nodded. "You should feel proud." I looked out at the wet street, watching puddles ripple under passing cars. Pride's not the word. What is? Closure, maybe? Or exhaustion? She smiled faintly. Both can coexist. We stood there for a long time, just listening to the rain. That night I came home to find Laura sitting on the couch with her laptop open. She was reading something, eyes flicking fast. When she looked up, she said, "You're in the news again." I groaned. "Great." "It's not bad this time." She turned the screen toward me. The headline read, "Former attorney disbarred after evidence tampering scandal. Whistleblower cited as key witness." I scanned the article. It painted me as a reluctant but steadfast voice for professional integrity. Laura closed the laptop. "You won." "Maybe," I said, "but the system still lost." She tilted her head. "How do you mean?" "Because it took 6 months and a hacked hard drive just to hold one liar accountable." She nodded slowly, then leaned her head on my shoulder. Maybe that's how truth works. It crawls. I didn't answer, but I knew she was right. Truth doesn't rush. It waits. And sometimes it hangs a man with his own words. When the verdict came down, it wasn't shouted or celebrated. It arrived folded into a beige envelope stamped confidential, disciplinary action notice. Ethan Rourke, disbarred, indefinite term, effective immediately. I opened it sitting alone in my apartment, at the same kitchen table where this entire thing had started, with a cup of cold coffee and too much silence. The words didn't feel like victory. They felt like the end of a storm that had already taken the roof off. I read it twice, then a third time, then closed my eyes. That was supposed to be closure. But closure doesn't come in envelopes. At work, the temperature had changed again. The partners no longer looked at me like I was radioactive. The younger associates, especially the ones still idealistic enough to believe law had a moral center, treated me with a cautious sort of respect. Lander called me into his office one morning. His tone had softened since our last talk. "Carr," he said, "you did the right thing. I may not have said that before, but you did." I nodded, unsure if I believed him. He leaned back. "The board's impressed. They're considering you for the Compliance Oversight Committee, internal auditing. You'd be good at it." "Good at watching for liars?" I asked. "Good at cleaning up messes before they make the news," he said with a thin smile. I didn't give him an answer that day, but outside the firm, the story kept echoing. Ethan's fall had made waves through every courtroom in St. Louis. Clients pulled files, firms checked their ethics policies, and judges started reading transcripts more closely. Everywhere I went, someone seemed to have an opinion. At the bar downtown, 2 lawyers debated over whiskey about whether Rourke had been a genius gone too far or a sociopath in a suit. At the courthouse elevator, a clerk whispered, "He had it coming, but still, what a waste." Even at the grocery store, a cashier recognized my name from a local news clip. "You're that lawyer guy, right? The one who told the truth?" I didn't know how to answer that, because by then, telling the truth felt less like a moral act and more like a habit that kept cutting back. Laura saw it too. "You're quieter lately," she said one night, curling up beside me on the couch. "Just tired," I said. She looked at me for a long moment. "You got what you wanted, didn't you?" I hesitated. Justice, maybe, not peace. Because of him, because of what it took. She didn't press further. She just took my hand and said softly, "Then build something out of what's left." That something came 2 weeks later. I got a call from Judge Markham, the same one who'd presided over Ethan's earlier case, the one he'd lied in. He invited me to speak at a seminar for new attorneys, part of an ethics program. "It's not glamorous," he said over the phone, "but they need to hear what happens when the line gets blurred." I almost said no. The idea of standing behind a podium and reliving it made my skin crawl. But something in his tone, steady, patient, weary, reminded me of the people who had watched Ethan's arrogance turn into evidence. "Yeah," I said finally. "I'll do it." The seminar was held in a modest hall at the St. Louis Bar Center. Maybe 50 people showed up. Fresh faces, new suits, notebooks ready. I stood at the front, tie loosened, notes in hand. I started with a simple question. "How many of you think you'll never cross the line?" A few hands went up. I smiled faintly. I used to think that too, until I realized it's not a line, it's a slope, and it's greased with deadlines, pressure, and pride. They listened. No fidgeting, no whispers, just quiet. I told them about the emails, the court transcripts, the bragging over coffee. I didn't name him outright, but everyone knew. And when I finished, I said, "If you ever find yourself defending a lie because you think it's clever, ask yourself who you're really trying to convince, the judge or your own conscience." The applause wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Afterward, a young woman approached me. She couldn't have been more than 25. "Mr. Carr," she said, "can I ask something? When you realized he was lying, weren't you afraid people would think you were just jealous?" I smiled sadly. "They did. And you still did it? Fear doesn't make truth less true," I said. "It just makes it harder to carry." She nodded slowly. "I hope I'm that brave someday." I wanted to tell her it wasn't bravery. It was stubbornness with a conscience attached. But I let her believe what she needed to. That night, on my way home, I took the long route past the courthouse. The rain had started again, the same kind of soft drizzle that had fallen the day I first testified. Through the window, I saw the janitor sweeping the marble steps, the same steps where Ethan once stood smiling for reporters. Now his name wasn't even on the directory inside. The brass plate had been removed. I stood there a while, the rain collecting on my coat, until Laura called to ask if I was coming home. "Yeah," I said, "just saying goodbye." A few days later, I got an envelope in the mail with no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper, typed, not handwritten. I thought I knew the rules. Turns out you were the only one playing by them. E. No threats, no defense. Just that. I stared at it for a long time before folding it neatly and sliding it into my desk drawer next to his old business card. Two relics of a man who'd once believed lies could win forever. I didn't know if it was apology or manipulation, maybe both. But for the first time, I didn't need to decide. Weeks passed. The bar moved on to its next scandal. The paper stopped calling, and life settled back into something resembling normal. I took the compliance role at the firm, quietly auditing contracts, catching mistakes before they became headlines. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest work. Some nights, when everyone else had gone home, I'd sit in my office with the window cracked open, listening to the traffic hum and thinking about how justice isn't a moment. It's maintenance. It doesn't end when someone falls. It continues every day you refuse to become them. The last time I saw Ethan was by accident, in a grocery store parking lot. He was wearing a plain jacket, hair longer, eyes duller. No reporters, no entourage. Just a man carrying a bag of groceries and looking smaller than I remembered. He saw me first. "Daniel," he said quietly, nodding. "Ethan." There was a pause, the kind that stretches out like a decade. "Guess you won," he said. "No," I said. We both just stopped pretending. He half smiled, half flinched, still quoting conscience, still living with mine. He didn't answer. He just turned and walked away. The sound of his shoes on the wet pavement faded, until all I heard was the wind pushing through the carts. That night, Laura asked what was on my mind. "Just an old ghost," I said. She smiled gently. "You're allowed to let him rest." "I know." But as I looked at her, I realized it wasn't just about him anymore. It was about every small lie we let slide, every truth we postpone because it's inconvenient. Because in the end, that's how people like Ethan win, by convincing the rest of us to wait. And I wasn't waiting anymore. It took me almost a year to realize that what Ethan had destroyed wasn't my career. It was my illusion about what kind of world we were working in. Law school had taught us statutes and precedent, but not how truth moves. It doesn't sprint. It crawls. Sometimes through years of silence, sometimes through people like me, who take the hits because someone has to stand up first. But I learned something else that year too. Silence has a half-life. If you don't break it, it just keeps echoing. By summer, things at the firm had settled into an uneasy rhythm. My new title, Compliance Review Counsel, looked good on paper, even if it meant trading adrenaline for spreadsheets. Every so often, I'd get calls from younger lawyers, sometimes from other firms, asking how to report misconduct, how to document evidence without losing their jobs. I always told them the same thing. Keep copies. Keep calm. Keep it boring. Boring gets believed. One night, after hanging up from one of those calls, I sat in my office long after dark. The city outside pulsed with the hum of traffic, the kind that never really stops. On my desk was the file I'd kept from Ethan's case, the one I still hadn't archived. I should have deleted it months ago, but part of me couldn't. I opened it and scrolled through the old emails, the transcripts, the photos of evidence tags. My own words on the witness stand stared back at me like a version of myself I no longer recognized. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? I do. I had, and I still did. A few weeks later, I got an invitation from the Missouri Legal Review, a panel discussion titled Integrity in Modern Litigation. They wanted me as a guest speaker. I laughed when I read it, not because it was funny, but because it felt surreal. A year ago, I'd been the guy no one wanted to sit with at lunch. Now I was a cautionary tale with a moral. Laura found me reading the email at the kitchen counter. "You're going to do it, right?" she asked. "I don't know," I said. "Feels like turning pain into a brand." She stepped closer. "Or maybe it's turning experience into a warning." She was right. Again. The panel took place in the same courthouse auditorium where Ethan had been cross-examined months before. I hadn't realized that until I stepped inside. The smell hit me first. The same waxed floors, the same faint tang of old paper and disinfectant. The lights buzzed with that soft courtroom hum that makes everyone speak a little quieter. I sat on stage with 3 others, a judge, a legal ethics professor, and a journalist who'd covered the Rourke case. When my turn came, I stood at the podium and looked out over the audience. "I used to think lying in court was rare," I began. "Then I realized it's not the lies that are rare. It's the people willing to call them what they are." I paused, scanning the faces. Students, clerks, attorneys, even a few judges. "The law doesn't collapse because of liars," I said. "It collapses when the rest of us stay quiet long enough for those lies to sound normal." The room stayed still. No coughs, no shuffling, just quiet attention. I learned that from someone who thought he was untouchable. He bragged about bending truth until it broke. And when it finally snapped, it didn't just break him. It showed me what truth can do when you stop apologizing for it. When I finished, the applause was soft but steady. Not celebration, acknowledgement. And for the first time since the cafe where he'd bragged, I didn't feel angry, just lighter. After the panel, as I was packing up my notes, the journalist who'd covered the case walked over. "Funny thing," she said. "You know he's moved to Chicago? Doing contract work? Nothing law-related. Word is he's writing a book." I raised an eyebrow. "About what?" She smiled faintly. "About truth." I couldn't help laughing. Quiet, tired, honest laughter. "Of course he is." She hesitated. "Do you want to comment?" "No," I said. "Let him have the last word for once. I already have the record." That night, back home, I sat out on the balcony with Laura. The air was warm, the kind of still summer night where the city smells like concrete and rain waiting to fall. She handed me a glass of water. "So what now?" "I don't know," I said. "Maybe I'll teach someday, or write about this. Not names, just lessons." She nodded. "Maybe that's how it ends." I looked out at the skyline. "No," I said softly. "That's how it continues." Because truth doesn't really end. It just finds new voices. Weeks later, I cleaned out my home office for the first time since everything happened. Among the stacks of old case files and receipts, I found the envelope Ethan had mailed me. The one that said, "You were the only one playing by the rules." I held it a long time, then finally slid it into the shredder. The paper disappeared in seconds, but the echo of it stayed. Maybe he meant it as sarcasm. Maybe not. Either way, it didn't matter anymore. What mattered was this. He'd once bragged that truth was just well-performed fiction. But in the end, it was his performance that convicted him, and my silence that would have freed him. I'd chosen not to stay silent, and sometimes that's all it takes. A few months later, a new intern joined our firm, fresh-faced, nervous, trying to hide how terrified she was of messing up. On her first day, she asked me how to survive the job. I told her the truth. Don't chase being right. Chase being honest. Right changes every day. Honest doesn't. She smiled and scribbled it down. I could see the same fire in her that I used to have before cynicism tried to drown it. Maybe that's what this all was about. Not punishing someone else, but protecting what little belief we have left in fairness. One night, I passed the old cafe where Ethan and I had last sat as friends. The neon signs still flickered. The tables were new, but the air smelled the same. Burnt espresso and ambition. I stood outside for a moment, watching the reflection of the city lights in the window. For the first time, it didn't feel like the past was watching me back. I took out my phone, opened my notes app, and typed a single line for myself. Let truth hang them. You don't have to. Then I put the phone away and walked home. If this story moved you, subscribe for more real-life confessions and emotional journeys like this one.